listening to The Power of Being Positive, helping you discover strategies to unleash the uplifting, energizing, and motivating power of being positive and the awesome effects that it can have in your life. Getting ready to power you up in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to The Power of Being Positive. I am your host, David Clark. And on this episode, we have a very special guest, Dr. Bhrett McCabe. Bhrett is a licensed clinical psychologist and a sports and performance psychologist. So he works with athletes of all ages and ranks. He works with PGA Tour athletes. He works with sports organizations from colleges to high schools. He is also a speaker and works with business leaders as well. Bhrett has an extensive background in not just psychology and working with athletes, but he's also worked in the pharmaceutical industry and helping them refine sales processes and things like that. Bhrett has written one book called The Mindside Manifesto, which is a great book if you want to understand how things work and how your mind works and how to really have a positive impact and positive mindset. And he also has a couple of online training programs. So if you get a chance, go and check those out. So with that, we're going to get into an awesome conversation with Bhrett about how to deal with stressful situations and how he works with his athletes on the best ways to overcome those situations and how to maximize their performance during that. And hoping that we can take some of this information that we learn from this conversation and again, apply it to our lives and business and things like that. So with that, Bhrett, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So first off, I've read most of your first book that you put out, The Mindside Manifesto. Mm-hmm. For me, I've read lots of books as you and I have talked about before, about ways to kind of keep a positive mindset. And I've read a pretty large book on NLP, trying to understand ways to better train my brain. It's one of the terms you used earlier. But this book is awesome because when I was in college, I started to go down the psychology track and I wanted to be a psychologist. And then I had somebody talk me out of it essentially. And when I went more into business. And a cool thing about this too, that this book is really helping me with now, is I've got a 14-year-old son who just started competing in high school sports. So I'm really using a lot of this to help him try to keep his mindset in check and his expectations in check as he goes through this first experience in high school sports and dealing with competing against guys that are 4 years older than him and have 4 years more experience and all this kind of stuff. So it's really helping. I guess to kind of get to the point of this is like, as you're dealing with athletes and athletes of, all levels, and obviously you being a former athlete of yourself, pitching at LSU, what are some of the things that you work with them on as they're walking into like a high stress situation to help them deal with it better?
Well, I think the first thing you have to understand is the 90% of the people who come see me, there's something that's at rub right there. Okay. So there's something that they're going through in their performance life. There's something they're going through in their mental framework that doesn't reflect or doesn't feel right to them. Nobody ever comes to me and says, "Hey, I just landed the greatest sales contract of my career and I want to make sure that I do it again." Because when people are basking in that glow, the processes worked enough for them that they don't feel like there's a problem. What happens is people come to me because there's an insecurity, there's an inefficiency that's happening, and they want help. So when I'm meeting with somebody for the first time, I'm breaking them out of that stuck mentality. And I've been very good over the years to help identify what is causing the stuck for them. Now, what you have to understand is that everybody has got their own psychological fingerprint. And the way that we look at things is unique to us. It's formed by our early experiences. It's formed by our belief sets. It's formed by the experiences that we've had, the positives, the desires that we have, how much we want to put ourselves out there, and so on. So what happens is over the course of training, over the course of the experience, you start becoming your own detective to understand what what triggers you, what empowers you, what stresses you, and so on. And so what I try to do is get them to understand that increased pressure just creates noise. It's just the drama around you that increases. Your underlying process will hold true if you stick to it. So when we get under pressure, we need to quiet things down. We need to simplify. We don't need to increase noise. We don't need to increase the drama. But when we have insecurities, we have doubts about ourselves, we actually do that. And so that's why, when I'm working with individuals, I want to know who they are. I don't have a process. My process is the person. And being a clinician and understanding human development, human experience, it's really the most important thing is saying, okay, what is it that you need to do that is based on your psychological fingerprint to help you match your demands? And then keeping them patient, keeping them, helping them build resiliency in the different factors like that.
Okay. So I guess like one of the key things that I'm getting out of some of the things that I've read, in the book that you've got, you start off the beginning of the book talking about the importance of self-belief. And as I'm reading the book, you kind of continue to go back to that over and over and over again. So talk to me a little bit about because I would imagine, as you're, any of these high stress situations and things like that you deal with, essentially the pressure you're feeling, and I'm going to pull this based out of a quote that was in your book. And one of the thoughts was, basically the pressure that you feel is equal to your lack of preparation or strategy.
Mm-hmm.
That's pulled right out of the book. And that delves back into like self-belief, but like, how do you work with your clients and people on that?
Well, so you've got to, first thing people have to understand is any kind of circumstance that we face in our life has an uncertainty associated with it.
Right.
The uncertainty is that we just don't know how that environment's going to go. So the nerves are the arousal, the psychophysiological arousal that we feel. So that's increased heart rate, the fight or flight response, increased heart rate, narrowing a visual field, and all the other factors that we know. That's just getting our mind is just triggering that part of our nervous system to be prepared for the uncertainty because we don't know how it's going to go. Now, when you have thousands of experiences at the same level, that aspect of your nervous system will normalize, let's say, just to kind of keep it in a simple term. So you don't have the same spike, but then you go to something new, novel. All of a sudden, those feels are back, and those feels come back strong. Well, what happens is if you're not comfortable in that feeling, you see that as a negative. You feel, and then the mind's primary job is to keep you alive. So all of a sudden now it feels this psychophysiological bump, heart rate's up, your mind is searching. Your mind isn't searching for opportunities. Your mind is searching for safety. Well, it's also going to identify the threat to know how to make it safe. So I always tell folks, I'm going to take you to a ballroom and there's 500 people sitting on the other side of the curtain and I'm going to make you give a talk. Okay. And I'm going to say, you can talk about whatever you want, but you're going to be judged on it and so on. Well, that's the reason fear of public speaking is one of the greatest fears we have. So before you go out there, you're going to be worried. You're going to be thinking, oh, I hope I don't pass out. I hope I don't bumble my words. I hope I don't, all the different factors. Okay. The reason for that is your mind is trying to identify where the risk is, where the threat is. And embarrassment is a very high threat for the ego. So you're going to respond with that increased arousal. But if you looked at it differently from a perspective of being somebody with a lot of self-belief, going, well, you know what? I've done this 15 times before. I've survived each and every time. I have a content I want to talk about. I'm good up on stage. That's a difference of a self-belief. You can walk out there and take that arousal, which the fearful person labels as anxiety, and instead labeling it as adrenaline. And then, well, I've done this so many times. So whenever I give talks, I give a ton of corporate talks. I love doing it. But I learned something a long time ago from my advisor in graduate school is always take the first 4 or 5 minutes to talk about yourself. That allows you to work off the adrenaline. It allows you to stick with something that the audience doesn't really know is right or wrong, or if you flub something, nobody knows. And then you get into the rhythm, and it's a nice transition because the mind wants to go faster than the body and the mouth can go. So it allows you to speak about something or where you are that's personal to you. And it's a trick that I've used for 15 years, and it's very successful. I do it with every client I meet with first face-to-face or in remote settings. I will talk about them or talk about me until we get into the heat of the moment. I'm doing that to allow them to work off the adrenaline. But at the core of all that is, what do we believe in ourselves? Do we believe that we can execute? Do we believe that we can sustain? And do we believe that we can endure the threat that we're seeing? If you have low self-belief, you don't believe, and it's a concept called self-efficacy, which is what Albert Bandura, one of the early psychologists, coined to define the ability to persevere and push through a task to successfully complete it. Do you believe you can do it? Well, people who have low self-efficacy very rarely succeed at tasks, because what happens is when it gets hard, they bail, they quit because they didn't think they could do it. So it's the out. It's like my buddy who was the Navy SEAL said, if you don't think you can make it through SEALs, the first day it gets hard, you're going to ring the bell because it's just not worth it. But if you believe you can do it and you have a plan to do it and a mindset to do it, you'll see the adversity as a short-term burst, a short-term challenge to your soul, and instead figure out a way to overcome it or work through it. When you have self-belief, you know you can do it. Now, the problem is how do we build self-belief? We would love to think that positive reinforcement is the greatest builder of self-belief, but that's not true. The best believer of self-belief is enduring and overcoming. It's not the fact that failure is great for us. It's the psychological motivation that we gain out of failure, and it's the learning in that environment that we gain out of failure that's great for us. It's not the fact that we failed that we should be celebrating. And I think that's been a little bit of a business book mentality over the last 10 years that everybody has jumped on, is that failing's good. Failing's not good. Nobody wants to fail. But it's what you do with the failure that makes your future. And that always enhances that self-belief.
Yeah, that's that's one of the things that I read somewhere else. This kind of a catchphrase was like, what breaks you makes you,
Yeah.
What you fail at will eventually, again, if you don't let it turn you into a quitter.
Well, I had a guy
Take that and learn from it. It absolutely carries you on.
Well, I had a guy had on my podcast who is has been in recovery for a long time from a heroin addiction dependency, and I asked him, I said, "What is it like to be at rock bottom?" And he said, "You don't really realize what your rock bottom is until you're on your way back up, because every time you think you're at rock bottom, you always surprise yourself to go deeper." He said, "It wasn't until I hit, until I was on my way back up did I realize what rock bottom was." What's interesting is minus a physiological breakdown, and we were talking about, we can usually sustain most of our rock bottoms unless our body can't sustain the toxins that we bring into it, like heroin or stuff like that, is that when we see things, we don't realize what we're actually capable of. And it's an analogy I've used in business for a very long time, which is breaking the fishbowl. If we go to the store and we buy a goldfish and we put it in a 5-gallon fish bowl, it will grow to that size that's appropriate for that bowl. It will not outgrow it. It'll stay in it. It'll stay happy, and it won't try to jump out. It won't do anything. As long as you feed and clean the water, it will be fine. But if you get a 30-gallon fish tank, it'll grow to become a larger fish. It grows to the environment that it's placed in. Well, the human being is the same way. As a species, we grow to the boundaries that we believe we can fit in. The problem with our brains is that our brains always go 1 or 2 steps inside of those boundaries. And over time, we start regressing instead of expanding. If you look at anybody in life and you look at what natural stress is that we start pulling back in. We start, oh, that's going to take too much effort again. Oh, that's going to be hard. Oh, it's more of a risk. And we start judging ourselves, and we start negotiating with ourselves not to do it. So somebody who's out there who's listening to this right now wants to do something. All right. Now we romanticize it's going to be easy. We romanticize that it's going to be quick, and we're going to romanticize that it's going to be effective. Okay. The problem with that is that when we do that, what we're actually telling ourselves is that I'm not prepared for the difficulty of what it really is. And so when you start on that journey, you start getting frustrated when it's not going according to plan because your expectations set you up for failure. And so, and that's where the fishbowl starts coming in and starts getting tighter. It's like, this is too hard. But if you truly believe in what you want to accomplish and you're willing to do whatever it takes to make it work, then you're willing to establish the demands in your life and mentality to make it happen. So, if you look at the NLP world, which is a lot of what it's a creation that came out of the cognitive behavioral world in psychology. And it's been done for mainstream, which is self-actualization and coding the cognitive processes that we have in our brain and being aware of when we doubt ourselves, how to reframe and repurpose what we're trying to say. And what happens is when we get down and we get knocked down during a journey and our self-belief is low or not patient or whatever, is that the underlying insecurities that we have, the one or two that I think drives all of us, we all have one or two that's unique to us. Remember that fingerprint. Then water finds a crack. Well, if we experience something and now it's really difficult, and if you don't believe that you're going to succeed or you believe it's going to be too hard, then the first sign of trouble, that insecurity rises up to the surface and you stop or you second guess or you lose interest in yourself and you lose your self-efficacy. And that insecurity does not have to drive your life. You can succeed despite your insecurities. You can succeed despite your fears. You can succeed despite your doubts, because we all have every one of them. But what happens is people have to be willing to put their self-belief and their self-image out there to say that it is not going to define me and limit me in my fishbowl.
Yeah, and I can speak from personal experience with that. I mean, anytime that, I've lost complete faith in myself, essentially, my self-belief just goes to the bottom, and I feel, and when that happens, you feel completely lost. You're like, you don't know where to go. You don't know what to do because you don't believe that you've got what it takes to do whatever it needs to be done to be successful. Right. And so then you start, the crazy thing is with, even times past with me is like, then I start looking, well, what do I think that I can do? And then I start, dinging myself through all that. So,
but see, this
and I guess, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, and this is why I'm writing what I'm writing right now, because Stuck in Suckville, right? Is because we are always stuck between what we are doing, our reality, and where we think we should be, our potential. That experience is always a Suckville mentality, because what we do is we don't see the fact that our reality is pretty damn good. What we do is we question it. We pick it apart. Our brains are not built to be happy and content. They can't be. Because if you think about it from a survivalist mentality, if you were happy and content, you would become prey for another predator. Okay? You would stop growing and you'd stop thriving. So our brain never accepts okay is good enough. It always demands more. So it romanticizes, it compares, it does the natural processes that create the insecurity in us. But that psychological angst that comes from insecurity, if you understand it and you can handle it, it will drive you to do more. The problem is for most of us, because the demands on us are so strong in this world, and they're unbelievably demanding right now. And we have so many comparisons that are probably false. It's like, all these people who, I love it when I see these people who consult with high-level athletes or say they consult with a lot of businesses. I've been in some of those settings where I've asked them if they've worked with them, and they've said, no, they were at a workshop we gave one time. So people, they over-represent themselves on a pretty large stage to try to grow themselves out of it. The ethics may be lacking or whatever. But that Suckville drives us to move. The problem with it is it's just like having, 37 or 97 days consecutive of sun with no rain, we get tired of the sun. If we have 97 days of rain and no sun, we get tired of the rain. So we have to have variety, but we have to learn to look at our reality and go, it's pretty freaking okay. It's pretty good, but I can make it better. And because every day we make our reality better, we push what our potential guidepost is further down the road. That's a problem. And we have to learn to look at things and go, hey, it may not be the ideal path, but the ideal path doesn't exist for anybody. I mean, Kim Kardashian is not a business model that any of us can replicate. Okay. She had a head start in a lot of areas. If you look at business individuals that work in the business genre, there are people who are brilliant writers. There are people who have great lucks. Look, there's 4 major tenets in life I want everyone to understand. Life's not fair. Get over it. Okay. You can't determine your circumstances, but you can determine what you're going to do with them. Good people don't always win and bad people don't always lose. If you understand those 4 things, you can be successful anywhere you are.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the big things, two things that I kind of want to run over is that, to reference what you were saying earlier, the pain of a loss is a lot stronger than the joy of a win, for the most part. I mean, at least that's the way that I've kind of figured things out as I've kind of gone along. And that's why so many people are scared to lose, because of, people are scared to lose because of how, they think their friends and family are going to respond to them, how they feel.
Yeah, but it's also more than that too. Think about this. I had somebody describe this in 2 ways. One, I've always used the example of, if you've ever had food poisoning, you're never going to go back and eat that restaurant again. Okay. Right. The memory of that will last a lot longer than a wonderful meal you had at the same restaurant. Okay. Right. I had another person explain it to me this way, and I thought it was great. And for athletes, they tend to get it. Is if you're out running in the woods one day and you're just out on a trail and all of a sudden you feel something brush against your ankle and you think you ran into a stick, and 30 feet further, you look down, you got a little blood on your leg, 60 yards further, now all of a sudden it's swelling, and 100 yards later it's hurting. You go to the emergency room, they're like, you've been bit by a snake. The next time you run and you rub up against something, you're not going to think it's a stick. Right. Despite the fact that you've rubbed up against a stick 1,000 times in your life, the one snake bite tells you that that's a dangerous scenario. Oh yeah. Failure is much more fatal than success is beneficial. So if you're playing the zero-sum game, the ultimate outcome is I have to be alive in order to prosper. So the mind is going to build constantly on anxiety and insecurity. Well, in today's world, because we don't have the ability with the same let me say this, generationally or evolutionarily, if you go back and look at us 4 generations ago, we'd put in a hard day's work, we'd come home, we'd sit around the house or the apartment, we'd turn on a lamp and we'd read and you'd relax, and you'd probably be asleep at 8:30 or 9 o'clock at night because it was dark. And you'd get up at 4:30 or 5 and you'd go to work in the morning. Well, now what we do is my average day is a 14-hour day before I ever decompress. I start my day at 7:30. I usually end my day around 9:30. And that's going to mix in a quick lunch and a quick dinner. And that's a 5 to 6 hour work week for me. And where do you ever have the time to decompress? Well, we don't decompress until we break down. Well, if you look at people in our lives, if somebody says they're leaving the office at 4:30, we think, why are you leaving early? Right? Yeah. Okay. Because we've been trained to hustle. We've been trained to go. We've added, it used to be when I played baseball, we'd have practice 2 days a week. Now we have to have practice 6 days a week. We've got constant demands and comparisons. So the mind is in survival mode all the time, and it's heightened to prevent ultimate failure. So therefore, why would it ever romanticize a success? There's more threat coming.
Right. Well, and I guess does that play into the thought of, in your book, you use the word outcomes, but obviously and I guess the way that I'm kind of thinking of is expectations in a sense, is that fear of, I guess failure is defined by not reaching a specific outcome, correct?
Theoretically,
do you see it that way?
Yeah.
So how do you work with, how do you work with people to help them understand and work through something like that? Because I mean, in this day and age, people are ruled by, like, for example, you and I, the reason that we have a friendship is that we've met expectations of one another, to be a good person, to do this, to be where we're supposed to be, to how we're supposed to be in general, and so people are judged so hard based off expectations. Like, how do you work with your, your athletes and your clients around that?
Well, so when I played baseball at LSU, we had what was called the system. And the system was our process by which we executed our on the field and off the field process. Okay. That process was based on details. It was based on doing the things that other people didn't have the guts or the wherewithal to do. And it was never anything sexy or fancy. It was the little things. All right. And if we committed ourselves to the system
Right.
would therefore work for us. Coach Nick Saban at Alabama has the process, very similar.
Right.
The reason is that both of those processes are built to create a mindset where I've got to influence my control where I can. Too many of us are running a race and we start romanticizing the finish line before we've ever crossed it. And even if we're having success, we pull up to appreciate it before we run through. Great teams, great organizations run through the line and evaluate at a later date. Now, that doesn't mean that LSU baseball or Alabama football don't want to win. Okay, you can't win the number of national titles that these teams have won and not be derived to what's the outcome. The process or their system is built based on the ultimate goal is to win each and every moment you're in. Okay. And if you theoretically win every moment you're in, you're going to put yourself in a position to win. That's why Coach Saban at the end of games is coaching as hard as he is at the beginning of a game, despite a 50-point blowout. If we're out here to win every moment, we need to win every moment we're in. My coach did the exact same thing. The problem with those mentalities is so many of us don't want to do those things, and we lock our self-esteem and our ego to the outcome. Now, our ego will always attach to the outcome. It always is. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means you're human. Okay?
Right.
But what happens is we short circuit our process because we want to ramp up and make the faster process happen. We're not patient. We're not resilient. And we romanticize or see ourselves where we are. There's a great analogy in the book, and it was based on a story or a question that won a gentleman, Daniel Kahneman, who's the behavioral economist and psychologist, the question. But the question essentially is, if you're playing blackjack and I give you some money, I give you, say $100,000, and you have to put half it on a hand of blackjack, and you lose, you have $50,000 in front of you. What are you going to do? Well, the problem is what the mind starts looking at that money and goes, I don't want to lose again because I can use that $50,000 for something, whether it's fun, paying. Most people would pay out bills, but you get my point. Okay. Well, the reason why that's a problem is you're taking a small outcome and playing in the future with it. And what the average person doesn't assume is, well, I could win more money with this. I could earn more money with this. I could grow my pot. Instead of 50,000, I could grow more than that. Now, the funny thing is, if we had said you won the first hand, now you had 150,000 in front of you, you'd feel like a winner and your self-belief would be a little inflated until you lose. Okay. So, it's very interesting. So that's why I want people to invest so much in their process and their way of doing things. We assume that by doing those facets and those processes, the outcomes will happen, and they will. What ultimately derails all progress and ultimately derails all levels and chances of success is when we start expecting outcomes. Expectations are entitlements. They're based on things that we've had in the past or things that we've done in the past to try to predict a better future. We start expecting to win. You start expecting to play well. What you're assuming is that considering all factors stay the same, I will get the same level of performance. Well, the first factor of that is impossible. All factors do not remain the same. They're changing demands. And so what happens is that the first sign of struggle, instead of being resilient and flexible, What happens is you start pushing against it and start judging yourself, not responding to the challenges because it's not good enough. It's not fast enough. It's not happy enough. It's not anything. And so expectations are a killer. So what I want players to understand, or competitors or business people, is I want folks to, look at their business or their course of their work and say, I demand certain things, but I expect nothing. How could I expect anything in the future? Everything in the future has to be built upon what I do in the moment. So I'm going to create that and make it happen versus fight against it.
Yeah, that's awesome. So it's kind of like, again, reading this book, working with my son a little bit. I can give you a quick analogy. He's running cross country now, and so his first race, he finished 28th out of 200 kids, and then this last race, he finished. He had a PR for the run. Finished like 30 seconds faster than he did last week, but finished 68th place. So if you use that kind of analogy, and one of the things that I'm kind of gleaning from the book and everything else that I've read is that you absolutely can. The only thing that you can really control is your effort and your attitude, essentially, right? And your dedication to the process. You can't control how hard somebody else works that's competing against you. So if all things stayed the same and everybody worked the way that they were working, and you outworked them, then obviously you would outperform them. But you can't expect, everyone else. There's just too many factors. Like the only thing constant in life is change, right? And everything. There's so many dynamics of life in general that are happening around you that will limit either your performance or will excel someone else's performance. So, kind of what you were saying, going back a little bit, is that you can't judge yourself off of somebody else.
Well, and you can't. Well, but judgment is one of the key problems, right?
Right.
So judgment, when we start focusing on being reactionary and judging everything that we're doing, we're never going to win that game, because what we're doing is we're rejecting who we are at the moment. Now, here's the thing that people have to also understand that are listening to this, is that if we look at success, my formula for success is that we all have skills and talents. Obviously, people who have more skills and talents are going to have a better chance of success. Right. But the second factor of it is how you apply those skills and talent under pressure. Well, if you have all the skills and talent in the world, but you can't apply it under pressure, it's not really worth anything. That's just sexiness. That's all that is. So right. We fluff. Often see fluff. Well, we call it in sports, you get off the bus stuff. When they get off the bus, they look huge.
Your drip. It's called your drip now.
Your drip. Okay. So when you get off the bus, your drip is real strong, but you ain't got any kind of game. Okay. And there are teams in sports that in colleges that are always looking at the potential of that, because they are seductive. You look at a business person, the salesperson's got everything together but can't do the job. All right. I mean, I've made bad hires in leadership in my business for the same reason. And I've had to eliminate them from my job, terminate them move them on their way and have them find something else, because while they looked the part, under pressure, they couldn't handle it. Then the third factor is mental flexibility, the ability to adjust to the chaos of life and competition. So you could be great and be very skilled and be great under pressure, but if you can't handle the demands psychologically, you're going to crack. And we've seen that with some athletes. We've seen that with some business people who they come in, they burn really, really bright for a short amount of time, but they break down and they can't handle it. And you'll see people say, I got burned out, or they'll say, the stress got to me and I had a breakdown. That doesn't mean they had a nervous breakdown. It just means that their infrastructure breaks down because they couldn't be mentally flexible, or the demands to live up to it were just too intense every day. And while they could do it, it's one of those things that we have to be very cautious of. The last factor is luck. And that's the the circumstance and chaos that we live in. So if you can understand that most people invest their time complaining about what happens to them, the luck, and comparing their skills and talents to other people, they're ignoring the two most important factors of the success formula, which is their ability to handle things under pressure and their ability to be mentally flexible. If you can manage those two things and grow and enhance those, you actually increase the odds. That's why, when we look at athletics, you see the gritty, gutsy player who doesn't necessarily have all the skills and talent but can overcome. It's the Malcolm Gladwell approach of David and Goliath. It's the underdog. So when you look at that, those typically people are going to invest their resources in one or two of those areas in the four areas. Well, if they don't have the skills and talent, then they better work in those other two areas. But too many of us get so seduced by skills and talent that we ignore the others and we assume that they're going to play. So you have to look at the mental framework in whatever we do. And that's why great athletes, great competitors, great business people have a chip on their shoulder. I never forgot a guy who came and saw me who was a senior executive in this city. And when he shut the door with me and doing my executive coaching, he's like, man, I am so over my head. They should have hired my colleague. I didn't even realize I was up for the promotion. That guy had all the resources and tools. I said, then why didn't he get it? Why did the senior leadership pick you? And he's like, well, he's had a couple issues in the past of not being able to, in the bigger moments. I said, okay, so either he has to learn to get better there. But the reality is this guy doesn't believe he's as talented or skilled, but overcompensates by developing relationships, building bridges with colleagues and clients, executing, following game plans. Well, of course the leadership took him. Not everybody needs to be Steve Jobs. There's a reason why Tim Cook is the leader of Apple right now. He's not an innovator. He's a stabilizer. He's a person who executes process. The job of Tim Cook is not to redefine the way we communicate. That was Steve Jobs' job.
Yep. Yeah, that's awesome. All right. So couple other just quick questions to kind of round out the podcast. So who do you go to? Like, who are some of the people that you read or listen to or watch to kind of help you stay motivated?
I would say without question, Ryan Holiday for me he speaks my language and what I'm looking for. He scratches my itches. I found Ryan Holiday a couple years ago because of The Obstacle is the Way book that when I was in Tuscaloosa working at Alabama, one of the personnel directors was just a massive fan and had brought in a bunch of copies of it. And so I read it and I was like, ooh, this speaks. This is good. And then I read Ego is the Enemy. And then I went back and started reading some of his older books. And one of my favorite books in the business genre is a book called Perennial Seller. I'm actually going there on Monday to go do an interview with him and going to spend the time slot with him. I'm not expecting to spend all day with him, but that'll be a fanboy moment for me. So I really like what Ryan writes. I've got a copy of Stillness is the Key, his new book, on my desk right now, and I'm going to start reading it tonight. So I think when you look at that, I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan in biographical books, not necessarily autobiographies. I like documentary-based things, whether I'm reading it or I'm watching it. Anybody who's persevered to find a path. I love the military because my dad was military, so it speaks to me. But I think when I look, I'm always a very positive guy. So I remember my mom, when I was a kid, gave me the book, Norman Vincent Peale, The Power of Positive Thinking. And she wrote in the inscription, giving this to the most positive person I know is kind of funny, but it always is a nice guidebook. I think, anybody like that I like to read. I like to, obviously I enjoy watching and listening to the energy of somebody like a Gary Vaynerchuk, just because I like his ability of breaking fish bowls. Anything is possible. Yes, he's had some unique opportunities. Yes, but people create that. I mean, like I said, everybody starts at a different starting spot, and everybody has a different finishing goal. I like his stuff. And so I try to keep myself engaged on different folks. I mean, if I watch a good documentary, that tends to do it for me. I'm not a big reader, I like to listen. I think Daniel Pink has got some pretty amazing stuff. Power Moments was a really good book. So those are the ones I tend to listen to.
That's awesome. And I mean, you've been around some pretty powerful individuals, but from reading this book, you've had some pretty good, I feel, positive mentors and male role models kind of along the way. So give me one thing that you learned, like, or maybe a quote or something like that you've gotten from a mentor that's kind of stuck with you and directed you, kind of maybe something that you go back to every now and then.
Well, I mean, there's a quote that Coach used to say, and we used to laugh when he said it, but it was a Paul Mayer, who's an early motivational guru guy, who said, anything you ardently desire, sincerely believe in, vividly imagine, and enthusiastically act upon must come to pass. That's always been one for me. My mom and dad were such key innovators. My mom has always been very insightful and very engaged in the human and the self-development process. My dad did it for more of a stoic process. My mom was more about potential and opportunities. And one of the things that she asked me all the time was, in suffering from anxiety as a kid and always worried. And, I can remember driving to school and having a pit in my stomach of what's today going to be like. Not that I didn't think I could handle it. Not that I just didn't know what today was going to be. Right. And my oldest daughter is much like me. But my mom used to always say, what's the worst that can happen? And when you really look at it, it's like, what's the worst that can happen? It brings me a lot of peace, because I'll sit there and I'll be like, even when I'm going out on tour, like I'll leave to go out on tour tonight, and I'll still get a pit in my stomach because I don't know how my clients, and yet I live the greatest job in the world. I will be walking fairways for the next couple of days, working with clients who have a lot of success. Some are struggling, some are succeeding. It's just a different phase of where they are in their career and their life and their season. And I'll look at them and I'll be like, God, and I leave, and I find myself when I leave the tournament on Wednesday night, because I don't stick around for the tournament, sometimes I leave myself and I go, oh man, I feel relieved. And I've really had to look at it differently, and really challenge myself from, the fact of, listen, it builds, and I want to say the angst that I feel is not so much of an angst of I don't want to be there. It's the angst that I feel of the exposure of the vulnerability that I have to put myself out there to work my tail off to make sure that my guys and girls are doing well and that they're achieving, because I take it on. So what's the worst that can happen is I get fired. Well, I don't want to, but I'm not losing my right to feed my family. I'm not, because I'll find a different way to go. And once I finally allow myself to see it like that, it does work.
Well, and also you care about these individuals. So you want the best for them, and you want to make sure that you're giving them your best. And dude, I'm completely with you on that.
But the other thing too is we care about what they think about us too.
Oh yeah.
One of the things that I always want to be is I want to be well respected and seen from a professional standard that is consistent with what I see in myself. And I'm going to be honest, what I see is lacking in many people in this field. And I'm not saying that from a judgmental standpoint. Oh, yeah. I'm very slow to acknowledge who I work for. I don't market my clients. I don't overstate the clients that I work with. It's funny. One of my players was leading the U.S. Open for 3 rounds and came in second when he got overtaken when Brooks Koepka won his first one. And on Saturday night in the Golf Channel thing, and that's a very big exposure to be in that situation for a player who's good. He's won multiple times. I mean, this is not like but it was the first time in a major at that high. But it's that stress of, if you fall back, I mean, if you come in 10th, you're happy. If you come in second, you're unhappy because you're so close to winning.
You're tasting victory.
You're tasting victory. And they asked him and the reporter said, he gives a lot of credit to what he's been doing with Dr. Bhrett McCabe. And I was like, wow, man, that was nice. And it was unsolicited. And there are people in my field that make that part of their process is that you have to mention them in interviews. I'm not going to do that. I tell my players I don't want to be mentioned. My dad did a lot of work in places where when the press conference was going on, they were on the next mission. But what I told him is I told him afterwards, I said, hey, you know what? Thank you for that. He goes, I didn't even realize I said that. That tells you how I feel about you. And I was like, and what he meant by that is I didn't feel like I had to recognize you because that you were such a part of my process that I can't imagine doing it without. Does that make sense? And I was like, yeah, it makes complete sense. I appreciate that. He's like, I didn't feel like it was if for this and that and stuff like that. Like I didn't feel like I had to in order to, like, it's just part of what I did. And I was like, man, that was a great compliment. I had another player that told me, he's recommended me to a couple of other players and they always say, well, what does he do with you? And he goes, I don't know. I just know when I work with him, I come out clearer, more focused and ready to go. And he goes, first time he told me that, I said that you couldn't give me a better compliment. And he's like, I don't understand. I said, the fact that you're not applying a process that somebody else has done means that I'm speaking very closely to what you need and it seems natural to you. And he's like, oh, so now whenever he says that, he goes, I know, it's the best compliment I could give you. But it's one of those things, and that's true, and that's how I want it to be. So I hope that the anxiety that I also feel is the fact that I want my clients to see me of value, to respect the way I do the business, and that they know that I'm invested in seeing them succeed, not because of what it means to me, but what it means to them.
That's awesome, man. So just to kind of wrap the show up, if someone wants to learn more about you and get more information about you, what's the best way for them to find you?
You can go to BhrettMcCabe.com. That's BhrettMcCabe. You get all the information you need and follow me on the social media handles, Dr. Bhrett McCabe, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and follow my podcast, The Secrets to Winning.
Awesome. Well, Bhrett, man, I appreciate you coming on the show and dropping all this knowledge on us. You're a very valued friend of mine, and it really means a lot to me that you take time to come and talk with me about this.
Anytime I get to, man. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries, man. Well, and with that, that's the power of being positive with Bhrett McCabe. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you could, leave us a rating or review, and that really does help me kind of figure out what I'm doing with the show. And I think we're like 10 or 11 episodes in at this point, and I'm still working hard to try to make this as smooth and as informational as possible for everybody that listens. So have a great day, and we'll talk to you again soon. See you later. Bye.
You've been listening to the Power of Being Positive podcast. To get more tips sent to your inbox, visit powerofbeingpositive.com.